Today we will be connecting fractions, decimals, and percents. Please copy down the standard benchmark indicator on a clean page in your math notebook. The student will identify representations of a given percent and describe orally and in writing the equivalence relationships among fractions, decimals, and percents. Fractions, decimals, and percents. Fractions, decimals, and percents all name parts of a whole. Percent means per hundred, so 15% means 15 parts per hundred. The grid to the right has 72 out of 100 squares shaded. The shaded part can be represented with a fraction, 72 100ths, or 18 25ths in simplest form, by a decimal, 0 and 72 hundredths, or by a percent, 72%. Write 36% as a fraction in simplest form and as a decimal. 36% we know is 36 out of 100, so we know it goes 36 over 100, and then we know the decimal is 0.36. Then we have to simplify the fraction because unless it tells you otherwise, always, always, always simplify your fraction. So we know 36 and 100 can both be divided by 4, which gets us 9 25ths. So 36% equals 9 25ths, which equals 36 hundredths. For the second example here, write 47 hundredths as a fraction in simplest form and as a percent. So we take the decimal, and it's 47 hundredths, so we just put 47 over 100. 47 is prime, so we can't simplify it. And we know 47 out of 100 equals 47%. For a third example over on the right here, it asks us to write 3/4 as a decimal and as a percent. You can use a proportion or divide to help you. So we know that 3/4 needs to equal something over 100. You can do it using the cross multiplying like they've done, 4 times n and 3 times 100 equals 300. Then they divide it by 4 on both sides to get 75. The other way to do it is the way we talked about it in the previous video, where you just set up the proportion there and you figure out 4 times 25 equals 100, so I need to do the same thing to the 3, the numerator at the top, so 3 times 25 equals 75. Or, the third way to do it, if the number doesn't go up into 100 nicely, because some fractions do not, we use division. And a fraction is always read as a division problem. It's 3 divided by 4, so the numerator always ends up inside the division house, and the 4, the denominator, is the divisor outside. So 4 can't go into 3, so they add a decimal and a couple zeros. 4 goes into 37 times. They put the 7 up above the first 0. They subtract the 28. They get 2. So then they bring down the second 0 they added. 4 goes into 25 times. We put the 5 up. We subtract the 20, and we have 0 as a remainder. So our decimal becomes 75 hundredths. So 3/4 equals 75 hundredths in both fraction and decimal form, and also equals 75%. So for problems 1 through 8, it wants us to write each number in 2 other ways. So if it gives us a fraction, we need to do the decimal and the percent. If it gives us the percent, we need to do the fraction and the decimal, and so on, so that we have all 3 forms represented. So for number 1, we have 2 hundredths in fraction form. So the first thing we're going to do is write 2 hundredths in decimal form. Next, we're going to write it as a percent, and if it's 2 out of 100, we know percent means per 100, so it becomes 2%. For number 2, we have 71 100ths, so the first thing we're going to do is write it as a decimal. Next, we need to write it as a percent, and because it's already out of 100, we know it's going to be 71%. For 3, we have 9/10, so the first thing we're going to do is write it in decimal form. Then we need to write it as percent, and we know percent needs to be out of 100. So we need to get our fraction up into hundredths. So we're going to multiply the numerator and the denominator both by 10, which will get us 90 hundredths. Then we can look at that and see that 9/10 is 90/100, which makes it 90%. For 4, we have 17%. We know percent is out of per 100, so to write that as a decimal, we just bring the decimal from the end of the number and move it in 2 places, and we end up with 0 and 17/100. Then we can go directly from the decimal to the fraction, which is also 17/100, and it cannot be simplified. Right, for 48%, we're going to write it first as a decimal, so we know that's going to be 48/100. Next, we're going to write 48/100 as a fraction, and then we're going to simplify. We know we can divide both 48 and 100 by 4, so we're going to start with that and then see if it can simplify any further. As we look at 12/25, we know they do not have any common factors, so we can't divide any further, so our fraction is indeed in simplest form. For number 6, we have 60%. We're going to write that as a decimal. Now we know when a 0 is on the end of a decimal, when it's off on the right there, it's not holding any place. It's not keeping anything separated. It's pretty much useless at that point, so we're going to take it off, so we end up with 6/10. Then we need to go to a fraction, so we can do 6/10, and then we're going to simplify. We know 6 and 10 can both be divided by 2, so we're going to do that, and we'll get 3/5. For number 7, we have 4/100. So the first thing we're going to do is write that as 4%, because we know percent means per 100. So we just move that decimal 2 places to the right. It ends up after the 4. Because turning a decimal into a percent is like multiplying by 100, which lets you move the decimal 2 places to the right. For the fraction, we're going to write it as 4/100, and then we're going to simplify. We know 4 and 100 can both be divided by 4, which will get us 1/25. For number 8, we have 22/100, so the first thing we're going to do is write that as 22%. Next, we're going to write 22/100 as a fraction, and then we'll simplify. We know both 22 and 100 can be divided by 2, which will get us 11/50. For 9, we have writing to explain. Jamal said that he could write a percent as a decimal by moving the decimal point 2 places to the left and deleting the percent sign. Is he correct? How do you know? We know he is correct because we know percent means per 100, and if you move the decimal point 2 places to the left, you've moved it into hundredths, and you get your decimal. Finally, for number 10, number cents, two stores sell their goods at the manufacturer's suggested retail prices, so their prices are the same. Which store has the greatest markdown from their original prices? So the first thing we need to do is we need to turn either 30% into a fraction or 1/4 into a percent. It's going to be easier to compare two percents or two decimals instead of trying to compare two fractions. So let's take 1/4 and turn it into a percent. So the first thing we need to do is get it up to 100. So we know if you multiply 4 by 25, you get 100. So we're going to do that to the numerator as well to get our fraction up to hundredths before we turn it into a percent. So now we have 1/4 equals 25 hundredths, which now we can turn into a percent. So 25 hundredths is 25%. So as we look at the two percentages, Buy and Buy has 30% off the original prices, which means they're offering a greater markdown from their original prices. Please make sure you have all the work copied down and then glue this page in your math notebook.